everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado, and thankfully Kyle is here.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
So this is our first, I think, podcast where it's just me and you and on video, or at least the first time in a long time.
It's been a while.
Which is great. Yeah. So before we get into the podcast, if you want to support the show, if you like what we do, there's a few ways to give back to us. You give us a review on Facebook. Tell your friends about Psychedelics Today. Leave a review on iTunes. It's super simple in your podcast app. You just open up Psychedelics Today in the iPhone's podcast app, scroll all the way to the bottom, you can leave a review. We would love it. We would love it. There's also plenty of other ways, but we'll get into that later. All right. I guess, well, do we have any events coming up? You're actually going to an ayahuasca retreat in January now.
Yeah. I'm going to head down to Soltara, check it out down there, see what they have going on. I'm really excited about that. You know, we still are running our Navigating Psychedelics courses. So check that out, psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. Or actually, no, we have a new site, right? Psychedelictrainingcenter.com. Make it a little bit easier.
Right. Or, psychedelicstoday.com. Just click online education and it'll bring you right there. So we've got this 5-week live supported course where we work through all of the content in Navigating Psychedelics alongside with you and with the class. So not only do you get to ask your questions, but you get to hear questions from other classmates and develop some relationships in the psychedelic world. It seems like our classes have kicked off some amazing friendships, which is neat. It's cool to see photos of them online actually linking up on purpose after, something as simple as a 5-week online course. We get to meet folks at places like Horizons too, which is really neat. So thank you all for having taken the class and for reaching out when we have the chance to meet up in person. It's been cool.
Yeah, and I think like some of the last feedback that we got after we wrapped up our therapist class was just the container that we created, kind of allowing people to go deep in their process, and also really cool with the integration projects too, seeing what people come up with, and that's always a really awesome sharing time. I think people really enjoy that as well.
Right. So if you think there might not be enough information in there for you, you're probably wrong. The thing is enormous, and most students don't really complete all the material within those 5 weeks. But you've got lifetime access, so it's fine. And you'll get continued access in this Slack group that we've created, so you can go actually just chat with each other about it, and us. So it's a great package, and I think it's really going to help some people out. And has. The therapist course continues to shock me. That one is sold out, but you can still join us in the general class. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. So you want to jump into Horizons?
Yeah, so Horizons was, I guess, almost 2 weekends ago at this point we're recording. Yeah, we had an awesome time there. It was jam-packed, a lot of meeting folks, as always. I think that's the one benefit of coming together at a conference, is just the networking, and then just seeing old faces, old friends, and then also connecting with new people that we've met along the way, and meeting fans, listeners of the podcast. So I don't know, for me it's a really just kind of great social event, but also the information's really awesome too.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought they did an amazing job coordinating everything. Their media people were super helpful for us figuring out where we should be and what we can and can't do, all that kind of stuff, and provided us with some great photos and access to the audio early, which is really neat too.
Yeah.
So just awesome stuff. And they'll probably have the videos up in a week or two, which is going to be really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you missed the event and you want to check out any of these talks, definitely just follow Horizons. I think their website's horizons.nyc, and just stay tuned. They'll be releasing the video and audio as well within the next few weeks.
Yeah. So I spent most of my time talking to people, and I probably saw maybe a maximum of 6 presentations. I had to walk out of a couple for various reasons. This is kind of perhaps worth circling back on, but Stan Grof's critique of yes, it's great that all of this research is happening, but it's not really all that new, and we had kind of already knew everything already. But this is a psychiatrist who was doing all of this research decades and decades before all of this stuff was happening. So it's kind of like doubling down again, like doing it all over again so that the government believes you this time, because all of that other stuff was done before the real drug war kicked in. So
right. I think, with some of the newer stuff, we're getting new neuroimaging and understanding how the brain's working and kind of the psychopharmacology around these substances. That's definitely new.
That's the real breakthrough stuff for sure. I like to see, I forget the English lady's names. Was it Roz Watts and somebody else? They were talking about this ACE model for psilocybin therapy, psilocybin assisted therapy, just like accept, connect, engage, or something like that. Mm-hmm. Something along those. I thought that was interesting. It just wasn't novel enough to keep me in the room, just because I'm like, okay, cool. Like, you got a new model. And what's cool is that multiple models for working with people in psychedelic states work. So there's not necessarily one method that works best, or we can't really say that scientifically yet, but we can speculate about what might be better than others. So I definitely appreciate the fact that scientists are putting in loads and loads and loads of work to help progress the movement. But like in a historical context, it's like it's kind of a bummer that we have to do it again. But the neuroimaging stuff, they presented new neuroimaging data. I missed that talk, unfortunately. But that's probably the stuff I'm going to watch first. The thing that blew my socks off Saturday, well, let's start with the 5-MeO DMT talk by Dr. Alan Davis.
Yeah, so that was around afternoon, 12. Joe and I got there a little late, I think, on Saturday. And then, I ended up just kind of hanging outside, chatting with people. Every time I tried to go inside, somebody else would come up and chat, which was awesome. But I got to see Dr. Alan Davis, which was really exciting. He's the one person that I wanted to see present. And what was his talk called? It was called The Potential for Healing and Harm with 5-MeO DMT. And this was a really awesome talk just to highlight the type of research that they're doing and some of the challenges that are coming up. So, one kind of takeaway that I wrote down here, 5-MeO is so quick and fast. And Dr. Alan Davis was talking about, like, people sometimes have a hard time letting go into the experience because it's so fast and overwhelming. And some people reported it just kind of felt too intense and jarring at times, how fast that onset is. And the information, right? Like, people kind of talk about entering into this Godhead experience, pure white light, or I think they even described a whiteout, right? Like experiencing this whiteout where it's like, boom, you're there, and then you come back and it's like, whoa, what just happened there? And so he was saying that this happens both in research and in underground, and so preparation and integration can be challenging for people that want to engage in 5-MeO work. And then he talked also about this term reactivation, which was similar to flashbacks, but they like to use the term reactivation for this, and that means just re-experiencing the acute effects of 5-MeO or any other psychedelic. And he said, in most of the research that they were doing, it was happening within 1 to 2 weeks after an experience. But, on the flip side, we would think that this might be kind of negative, but some people were actually reporting that it was kind of positive to kind of re-experience some of these effects.
I think the number was 80-something% of people loved it.
Yeah.
And like 10 to 15% of people were like neutral about it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting. I think the number was 8% didn't like it.
Yeah.
Maybe even smaller.
I found that really interesting.
Right. Because we're digging into this HPPD topic in a few angles here. And it's a really complicated thing. Nobody wants to talk about it. But I'm thankful Alan brought that up on stage. And he did raise that there were some bad actors in the space of 5-MeO DMT facilitation, and gave some examples of what that bad behavior looks like, which is helpful. Because a lot of folks come into the psychedelic world going, okay, everybody's my friend, and everybody's like here to heal together, and that's not always true. There's a lot of bad stories in the psychedelic space, and we need to stay on top of that. How to address it, I don't know, but if you're a facilitator with a track record of multiple deaths, perhaps you probably don't want to pay that person money to facilitate for you.
Yeah.
Death is a pretty good indicator of no, but as you go further, you're going to hear other more complex stories from other folks. Like potentially he touched people or put somebody in a sexually uncomfortable position. Like, not necessarily rape, but really uncomfortable stuff that could have been traumatic. It's like, is that really the facilitator you want to go to?
Right. Yeah, and I think another issue with some underground work too is, Alan pointed out, or Dr. Davis pointed out, that there's like no control in the dosing in underground facilitation. So sometimes people might be getting higher doses than maybe they should be, right? Maybe the facilitator wants to facilitate a really intense experience because they think that's going to be healing for them. Maybe instead,
or they don't want somebody saying their drugs were stupid,
right,
and it didn't work. Either one, like it's powerful. So, well, it's a weird thing, right? Like if you like overpower somebody with like a big dose of a drug like this, there's this imprinting phenomena that happens. It's kind of like the leading edge of a cult. So, you've got this charismatic leader that you're now kind of imprinted on. And how does that work? I've seen some people who have been abused, like supporting facilitators who abuse them still. And it's like, what the hell's happening? Why would you do that? And there's this imprinting phenomenon that is under discussed.
Almost kind of like a safety thing, I think, when I'm thinking about it, of like this person put them in a really intense experience, and maybe that imprint is like, they're the person that can understand this and bring me back. And there's like a safety in like, oh, this person knows, right?
True. And knows, like, and I like to think of it like it's a new parent, like the duck that follows around the human, like you're my mommy now kind of thing. And like, you're the powerful person that can protect me and keep me safe and work me through this because you know better. And over time, we're going to have to say, okay, everybody's just a human. Like there's nothing, like people, perhaps there's folks out there with special knowledge like shamans in the Amazon, but how do we relate to that as Westerners? You're like, sure, bud, you've been doing this for 30 years. Like, here's my soul, or like, how do you test? Like this comes back to that topic of discernment. But I want to go back to the topic of dosage. Yeah. Often people eyeball their dosage in the 5-MeO-DMT space. And if they're using toad venom, or I forget what the right word is, secretions from the Bufo alvarius toad, it's pretty variable in potency. So some people will only get like a 3 milligram dose as opposed to like the much larger dose you would need to have their full experience, and thus the overdosing with natural toad. And even people with synthetic aren't necessarily using a nice scale. Like it's kind of harm reduction tip number 3. Like, get your test kit, know your source, and know what you're consuming. So buy a scale, buy a couple nice scales, like grams, kind of like a milligram scale. 3 zeros would be, save you a lot of, from a lot of situations probably.
Yeah. Was there anything else from that talk that stood out from you?
I liked to see Dr. Alan Davis giving a lot of people credit. So he gave credit to Dr. Brasuglia, Raphael Ensalada, Helene Uthaug, which is great, and a number of other folks. I think even Nathan Sapita, who's been on the show, was on his slide. I just really appreciated Alan kind of showing his whole team, and the fact that we kind of know a lot of them was really neat.
Yeah.
Anything really else?
There was one thing I wrote down here under the challenges and dangers. I'm not too sure if this was part of their research or maybe it was just like a anecdotal story, but I just wrote down one person had a quote unquote manic episode and also had an attempt, which I think kind of shows.
What do you mean attempt?
Like, I think it was an attempt at suicide.
Suicide attempt?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, I think that just kind of highlights the challenges that can come with really big transcendent experiences of getting like overwhelming the nervous system, being just like having too much insight, or just these experiences being too jarring, and then kind of coming back and being like, whoa, what am I doing with this? Or maybe on the other side, if you have like that mania of being like, I figured everything out and just like, now I'm going to do all this stuff. And it's like, how do we get grounded first before we can really start to tackle these things, right? It's not to say that we shouldn't have these big dreams or these big visions, right? But it's like, how do we stay grounded with it, right?
Yeah. And it's hard because a lot of people seek psychedelics and psychedelic therapy when they're in crisis. And how do we stabilize a little bit before kind of making that crisis worse? Or is the crisis an opportunity for change?
I always like that.
And is there enough support?
Yeah, there's that kind of phrase that says, like, it's not breakdown, but breakthrough. So how, this opportunity to emerge, right? Spiritual emergence. You're having this crisis. It's like an emergent thing, but it's also an opportunity to rise up from it, to work through it. And, as Grof would say, like, jump to this, like, next level of consciousness in a sense.
Right.
Or a higher level of functioning.
Right. And these are yeah. I love this concept from Ken Wilber of states and stages. And, we can reach this super high state of consciousness, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it changes our stage of personal development. Like, it could potentially regress you given certain factors. A lot of folks are really like hard line. Nope, acid's going to change you permanently and for the better. And that's not always true. I've seen, like, perhaps you're not addicted to pills anymore, but you're still not looking that great with how much acid you use.
Right.
I hate to say stuff like that, but it's not totally wrong. So next talk, unless you have anything else there.
No, I think that's about it. Yeah, I was really happy I got to see Dr. Davis present that. And I think, as you always bring up, what's going on in the 5-MeO world can be kind of... there's just a lot of things going on there. So I was just glad somebody represented that to kind of, show some of the research that's going on and some of the benefits and also challenges with it, that type of medicine.
So the talk that I mentioned before was psilocybin for depression, introducing the ACE model, accept, connect, embody. And that was Rosalind Watts, PhD, and Ashley Murphy Beener, assistant psychologist at Imperial Psychedelic Research Group. And those two are both with that group, which is really cool. Let's see, was another one. Neuroscience findings. Yeah, that was a real bummer. 10:30 a.m., Taylor Lyons presented the Imperial's group new neuroimaging data. And then there was a talk in the morning about microdosing. I didn't hear too much about that one. Ketamine and psychiatry. This was an interesting one by Elias Dakwar. He's a psychiatrist out of Columbia University. So he's constantly doing ketamine research, and he's a practicing psychiatrist. His data was pretty interesting, and he challenged a lot of assumptions. So the best thing I saw there was he mentioned how a lot of these frameworks are simply hypotheses. Like we've got, the depth psychology hypothesis, the kind of dysregulated, what is this thing called? Like, you're producing too much dopamine or too much serotonin naturally and stuff gets out of whack. So there's that hypothesis, biochemical hypothesis, neurological hypothesis. And I liked how he broke that down into saying, like, we don't exactly know yet.
Right.
And he's a high-end psychiatrist, so that was really neat. And then he was talking about the history of ketamine for depression, and I thought that was really cool to see some really nice data on that. Stay tuned for all the videos. I think they'll be out in a week or two. And that one was certainly one to watch. So the one that blew my socks off, again, a lot of folks didn't like it. Even Bob Jesse made some comments about it the next day, kind of discounting what Carl Hart was saying in a sense. Not fully, but in a sense. So the talk was called Dispelling the Lies That the Psychedelic Community Believes About Drugs. He's a professor of psychology in the departments of psychology and psychiatry at Columbia University. He's written a number of books. High Price by Carl Hart changed my views on drugs and drug policy quite a bit. So very worth reading. We'll have a link in the show notes for it, hope. But were you there? You missed that talk, right?
I missed it. I was trying to get in there and I got caught up talking to somebody. And when I looked down at my watch, I was like, damn it.
Yeah, that's the problem with these conferences. There's too many good people there to talk to. So you miss a lot of stuff. So Carl Hart is a researcher in addiction from a psychological point of view. And he talks about, he opens the talk saying, greater than 80% of the effects of drugs used, quote unquote, recreationally are positive. Like, I think it might have even been a higher number than that. And then he said something along the lines of people who become addicted, eventually their addiction just self-resolves even without treatment. So like a number like 80% or higher, I think.
Did he give any examples of how that resolves?
No, I don't think he had enough time. But, eventually it just gets boring, right? Like, you can look at, people in our age brackets, you get hooked on a video game for 2 years and then you're just like, that was pretty dumb. Why did I do that? And then you walk away. Look at Gabor Mate's framework. He's like, you're going to substitute in with another religion addiction. That was more a Carl Jung line. The only cure for like dipthomania is like religomania. Dipthomania, I think, being like you drink too much. So you swap out addictions and you do your best. But it's interesting. I think between his book High Price and the Johann Hari's Chasing the Scream, you get a much better understanding of how addiction functions, along with shame and stigma. And Carl Hart gets more into how it's perpetuated as a racial thing. He talked about PCP. PCP is a psychedelic drug. The psychedelic community doesn't own it, though. For whatever reason, it's got negative connotations, because when I was in middle school, the cops told me it made you a crazy person and then you could take 100 bullets. Carl Hart then showed a video. So trigger warning, like if you're a little sensitive, cover your ears or maybe just skip 30 seconds. He showed a video of a man walking away from police slowly. And he was just walking in the middle of the road. He was on PCP. So, well, allegedly, according to the cops. He was walking in the middle of the road, started walking away from a police car, kind of quickly. And then the cops shot him 15 times in the back. And he showed the whole group this.
Jeez.
To say, hey, do the cops do this with mushrooms? Like, fuck no. Like, so I was like, I'm very well aware of police and the racial bias often, and just essentially racial murder that goes unpunished by police. It's really messed up, and the drug war helps perpetuate it. Like, if we understood PCP better, like there's a lot of PCP users. Like Hamilton Morris's episode on PCP was very interesting. And then you start asking around and you're like, oh, you've smoked PCP, you've done PCP. There's actually a lot of people that have done PCP. It's really big in the heavy metal world, like Metallica and Slayer, all that kind of stuff. But you don't necessarily see a lot of people getting like hospitalized from it. Like they might get in fights, but probably going to happen anywhere. It's going to happen with booze, for sure. Booze makes fights happen. But PCP was kind of, I think it was came out of a modification of the ketamine molecule, and he went into that a little bit.
Ketamine was derived from PCP.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
So they were using PCP, and then they noticed that it was having too many effects within, the medical model, and then so they developed ketamine. Yeah.
Cool. So it's a good side benefit of chemistry. But there's people who actually use PCP like psychedelically and quote unquote entheogenically to actually do deep inner work. So let's not discount PCP. What are these drugs? Let's understand them fully and scientifically, and what are the applications of these drugs?
It makes me think about like dose again, right? Like people maybe smoking recreationally, like you always, I always heard people kind of like smoking it in weed or cigarettes, like sherms, right?
Right. They would dip cigarettes in it. Yeah.
And, maybe these like really intense reactions are just a result of too much. I don't know. Like, what if you actually just found your dose where it was like psychedelic enough where you're like, okay, I can work with this, versus like, boom, full blown, having like quote unquote like a manic episode and not being able to like, control yourself, or having like kind of like these superhuman strengths that you always hear about. What if you found a lower dose where it was a little bit more beneficial? I don't know. And, Hamilton pointed that out in I don't know if it was Joe Rogan or if it was on Tim Ferriss, but he was talking about drugs, and this really shifted things for me listening to this. But he said, there's no drug that's bad, right? Like, drugs are drugs, and it really comes down to how we're using it and then the dose of that as well. So, like, there's people that love some of these quote unquote dangerous research chemicals, and it's like, is that really a bad thing? Or is it the fact that, like, maybe they figured out they could take a certain dose and get a benefit from it where it's not getting into this, like, dangerous situation, right? And I always kind of come back to that phrase, a medicine can be a poison and a poison can be medicine, and it's all kind of dose dependent there, right?
Carl Hart kind of started the talk saying, what's the main reason people use drugs? It's to feel better. Like, we look at cigarettes, alcohol, cannabis, acid, mushrooms, crack, PCP, heroin. We use it to change our state to something that, we like, quote unquote. Not everybody's going to like every drug. Morality doesn't need to enter the equation. Like, he was proposing throwing out the whole drug scheduling system because it's ridiculous. And it's like, who are you to say that I can't smoke crack when I'm an adult or use heroin? Like, we know for sure that a country can do heroin just fine and have no overdoses and no HIV transmission and no deaths, and people can go along and do their lives just fine. Like, morality, when it comes into, like, it's bad that you do this. Like, that kind of conversation is crazy to me. Unless you're literally harming somebody, like, what are we doing? Mm-hmm. Like, it's like no drug should be illegal. We shouldn't be punished for this stuff. There's plenty of better things to spend money on. And if we look at the total, like, race implication, like, the black community is so hurt by the drug war that I think immediately, like, right now, we need to figure this thing out and, go forward. And he was pretty much saying, like, cool, like, decriminalized mushrooms in Denver, decriminalized plants in Oakland, and, like, whatever, Chicago now too. But, like, how many people are really getting arrested for that relative to how many black folks are getting murdered by police?
Right.
Like, for simple nonviolent offenses. And it's crazy, not to mention life sentences and the intergenerational impacts. And, it's really nuts. I kind of get really emotional on this topic for whatever reason. And,
there's a social justice component there, right? Like, versus thinking, like, I think within the psychedelic community, this healing idea, this and that, where there's people that are using substances to cope with, their situation, their traumas, their stress, and kind of getting abused for it or arrested or, even killed for it. And they're just using what they have, right? And society is saying, like, these are inherently bad things. You shouldn't be using these. And yeah, I think there's a whole social justice component there where people are suffering, they're using a substance to cope, and they're also getting punished for it, while on the other side, other people are using other substances to cope and to heal and kind of glorifying it and not getting punished for it. It's really interesting, even like something like cannabis, right? I mean, here's something that's starting to become widely accepted. I just saw that Mexico is about to legalize it. Canada just legalized it on that federal level. And then how many states here in the States that are legal? But, here in New Jersey, I think it still has one of the highest number of arrests. And most of those arrests are people of color. And so it's still used as a tactic to marginalize people, right? And I always make a joke, which I don't know if it's really a joke. Sometimes I think it's semi-true. It's like, there's there's so many people that get arrested here, especially people of color, that I don't even know if Jersey would actually want to actually ever legalize it or decriminalize it, because it's like, oh, then we can't make traffic stops and arrest this person for this or that, right? Like, they make most of their money doing that, which, I don't know, it's kind of messed up.
Right. Or is it a cost that is just kind of like a new angle on corruption for private prisons and whatnot? Mm-hmm. I don't think New Jersey's banned private prisons yet, but that's a trend that's catching on. New York, California, maybe elsewhere. But it's kind of like it costing the taxpayers a ton of money to lock folks up, and not to mention the downstream implications for those families. Like, now you've got a record and can't get a job because of weed. Like, what? Come on. So it's a complicated ball of wax. Whenever I think drug war, I'm thinking race war, and it's just a way, like, thankfully we have this platform, but if I was just another guy at a software company, like, I would have to keep this stuff way under wraps and couldn't talk about it ever. And that's crazy because there's people out there, because they can't come out because of the drug war, that would be huge advocates for psychedelia,
right,
or drug policy reform in general.
Yeah.
And harm reduction in general. Like, we can't even talk about drug checking at festivals.
Right.
It's insane.
Anyway.
Yeah,
I mean, it's tough, having this platform and being a voice, like, even living in a state where cannabis is still a misdemeanor charge and this and that, even just talking about drugs, it seems so taboo. And, it's so weird when I go to other places where it's like normalized. I still feel that anxiety of being in a state where it's still like a criminal penalty, and I go, whoa, this is really weird, and I think it affects me, in certain ways where it's like, like, even though virtually it's like, okay, we're connecting with people, it's like here in this state, it's like, I kind of feel somewhat quiet at times because of just how, I don't know, let's say how corrupt things are around here, but.
So we haven't talked about this, but Denver, so I may or may not have had a couple mushrooms in my pocket and some weed, and I'm walking into a concert and at some show, and it was like wildly relaxing and not concerning at all to do that. And that was like the first time ever feeling so calm and getting into a venue. So it was fascinating. And that's a shift that I think is going to start spreading over time, which is going to be really cool. But just imagine if everybody wasn't on edge, feeling taboo. And,
right.
Just remember to look up Portugal drug law and Swiss drug law. It's pretty amazing what's happened. Less use, less hospitalizations, less deaths, less HIV, less everything from a fairly sensible drug law reform. I've been getting in some battles with the decriminalized nature folks online. I wish I wasn't, but it's like, I feel like this talk by Carl Hart was directed specifically at them. And I really hope they watch the video when Carl Hart puts it out so they understand the argument. Like, yes, psychedelics are different in that they can be used therapeutically, but who's to say PCP and crack aren't used? Cocaine is prescribable in hospitals still. Same with heroin. The drugs you like aren't yet. But because we see substantial changes, beneficial changes in people often with psychedelics, not every time, like Charlie Manson, Jim Jones, and then the person that does too much psychedelics, they're not necessarily benefiting society. History would be more boring without Jonestown and Charlie Manson, but it's probably better if that didn't happen. So I don't know. It's a complicated argument. Realistically, this takes like a book to unpack, or like a 12-hour conversation to really unpack this thing.
I think it's something like alcohol compared to like psychedelics. Like, we think alcohol is like a stupor, right? And like there's no benefit besides like maybe social lubrication and being able to, there's these kind of social
lowers
benefits.
My blood pressure temporarily.
Yeah,
after my heart attack prone work day.
Take a chill out. But I was just chatting with somebody about like they were saying how like indigenous cultures would just drink alcohol to get into trance states. And it was making me think about even a story Martin Prachtel talked about in one of his books about like how in the Mayan culture they would get so drunk and dance all night and pray and do all this stuff and then have like a 3-day hangover. Like the town wouldn't do anything for like 3 days. People would just sleep and just because they got so hammered. But in that sense, it's like, using alcohol where we view it as a substance that doesn't necessarily have a spiritual benefit or a healing benefit, used in more of a ritualistic way where it's like putting you in a trance state and communicating, right? And so sometimes I think it's like subjective based on like how you're working with it. And like, it's really interesting too. Like I've talked to, my one teacher in my undergrad wanted to hook me up with one of her meditation teachers. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, maybe I'll go grab tea with him. And she's like, he's not the type of person you grab tea with. He's the type of person you go to the bar with and you're going to have to take his keys away. And like, I thought that, I was like, here's somebody that's like in this healing art, meditating all the time. And why is he drinking so much? And I find that is somewhat common in some of these like kind of Buddhist circles. And I also wonder what's the grounding effect, right? Maybe people are so spaced out by meditating all the time. Maybe alcohol brings them in their body, because it wasn't the first time I heard about a Buddhist meditation teacher loving alcohol so much that they're just getting completely annihilated, but then they have this other spiritual practice on the side that they're so deeply ingrained in. And I'm going back and forth. I'm like, well, maybe what the hell is going on here? Maybe they aren't as enlightened as they talk about because they're using such a dangerous quote unquote substance, right? To numb something out. I don't know, but maybe there's another agenda there. Maybe they're working with it differently. Like sometimes people call alcohol spirits, and from that like indigenous perspective, it's like it has a spirit. It gets us in touch with things. When you're thinking about making tinctures, you're extracting the plant essence into the alcohol, you're extracting the spirit, and then, using it that way. So, sometimes I think it just kind of comes back to cosmology and cultural beliefs and how we're using these things.
That term, I think, comes from alchemy. You're kind of releasing the spirit of the thing through these processes. So another Buddhist, I'm trying to read the title here. It's like this Alan Watts.
Right.
Out of Your Mind, Alan Watts, Essential Listening from the Alan Watts Audio Archives. He was a notorious alcoholic, also loved acid, but he was an amazing Buddhist lecturer and changed many lives. And there's a, like, I don't want to say that it was this guy, but like Chogyam Trungpa, I think, who is the Naropa dude, he would drink a fifth of whiskey before going on stage. It could be somebody else. Like, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but these kind of Lama style guys that would just be boozing. So what is that? We don't know. We don't have a firm answer, but dysfunctional people can still be good teachers and help a lot of people. So like, a heroin addict can still help a lot of people. An alcoholic can help plenty of people. And like, should we really be shaming them? So I just had a conversation with somebody the other day about psych meds and like how we shouldn't be shaming people for having to be on psych meds. Like, some people need to be on antipsychotics. Some people need SSRIs. Perhaps that's not the optimal solution for them in the end, but perhaps they just need it for now.
It was really interesting working in a residential place for people with early episode psychosis. And, a lot of people thought we were like anti-meds in a sense, anti-psychiatry, because the whole idea was to be with people and try not to medicate them. But yeah, there were so many times that like we found medication to be really helpful, and clients actually really liked being on medication because it really helped them out. And, I think we have to just give that to the client or patient, what works for them, right? There's this whole thing that they're really bad, don't take them, but they have their benefit, and some people like being on them. And why should we say that's not how you should treat yourself, right? Like,
shame is really tied up in this drug war thing, like morality. Like, let's really try to understand morality for ourselves. Like, I'm not going to tell you what morality is, but if I'm not hurting somebody, is the thing I'm doing moral? And to like, how many steps downstream does that thing have to not impact people? I don't know. That's where it gets really complicated. but think about it. It's a big part of philosophy. It's a big part of our world.
Yeah. So I guess Sunday, maybe move ahead a little bit. So was there anything else that you wanted to wrap up about Carl Hart's talk? It seemed like that really kind of stirred a lot of people's emotions up around this whole topic.
There's a lot of people that are really upset about it. And a lot of what he says is true. I know people are going to just say, like, let's decriminalize nature. But it's like, well, cool. But what about the race war? What about the drug war as a whole? Do we care about everybody, or do we only care about our own community?
Right. And, it even makes me think about like decriminalization in the law, like years ago, New York City decriminalized marijuana and they just decriminalized it again, I think just on more official level with more, looser regulation around that. But, I know folks that were arrested even though it was decriminalized, right? That whole stop and frisk thing that JAG talked about from DPA. Even though it was decriminalized, people of color were still getting arrested, still getting ticketed. So I always come back to this idea that decriminalization doesn't mean that it's always legal, right? People can still get arrested for these things. Doesn't mean that it's completely safe. Lowest priority, but that doesn't mean the powers that be can just ignore that, right? I mean, it pissed the taxpayers off.
The DEA had to step up in Denver recently, and that was a little unfortunate, but that guy was a little out of control in terms of publicity, and, he wasn't being quiet. And he was also trying to make money, which is part of the problem. I would happily pay twice the money for a mushroom I knew that was amazing, but if you don't have a legal regulated market, how do you know? It's tough. Like a lot of people, oh man. Yeah, here we go. So Robert Forte had this argument a while ago about know your chemist, and a lot of people are like, look what happened to the cannabis industry. But this is like a privileged thing that a handful of people have access to. Like if you're in the right area of Colorado or like a major city or California, like perhaps you can know your grower, perhaps you can know your chemist, but that's not everybody should know their chemist. It's too dangerous of a situation for everybody. Like the chemist, you get popped, you rat on the chemist. Hopefully you don't rat, but you don't know what you're going to do when you're under the gun.
Right.
Like hopefully you don't, and then the whole supply chain's broken. What if you didn't know your chemist and it was legal and it didn't matter because everything was of a known purity and quantity? And then this idea of farm to table drugs. It's not that's how I'm phrasing it. It's that's cool, but it's not realistic. And should it be? I don't know. I think we should get to the point where we're doing everything's organic, fair trade, psychedelics and drugs and fair trade organic cocaine that didn't destroy the rainforest. I think that's technically possible. I don't do cocaine, but enough people do cocaine where the rainforest is taking a big hit. All right, so on to Sunday.
Yeah, I'm sure we could keep ranting about that. That's a big
my blood pressure is high right now.
Complicated topic.
So the first talk was Shelby and Madison from Double Blind on Sunday. Mm-hmm. I missed that, but they were talking about their new magazine and psychedelics in the media. They did give us a shout out on one of their slides, which was really cool. Appreciate that. Have you checked out their magazine yet?
Yeah, I have a copy here, and then I know they're working on their second copy too. And they have a digital thing where they're publishing articles online, and yeah, it seems like they're doing really awesome work over there at Double Blind.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to meet Shelby. She's really cool. Been trading some emails with Madison, who's the other co-founder. Looking to see if we can have any kind of relationship with them and maybe help them out. This one would have been quite relevant. Oh, I did show up for this, or did I? Just for fun, the use of psychedelics in contemporary festivals and nightlife. Fiona Measham, chair in criminology, University of Liverpool. Actually, she was the director of this group, The Loop, I believe. Yeah, which is really, really a cool presentation. It talks about how people buy drugs in festival scenarios, or just in general, how many people are using drugs at festivals, and poly drug use too. She got into all of that, and then got into the degree to which her organization was able to decrease hospitalizations substantially at festivals. There's a lot of people that just buy whatever and just throw it in their mouths, or you have an on-site drug testing facility where you don't get in trouble. And she watches most people throw away drugs that weren't what they bought. It's very infrequent that you just eat the thing that you didn't thought you bought. And talked about a lot of the dynamics of heightened security at gates at festivals and how that breeds a lower quality, more dangerous drug dealer being inside the festival. So that was a tricky thing. If you're an established drug dealer with great product, you don't want to risk your situation. So it was really, really a neat presentation. my takeaway is always just buy ahead of time. Like, do your research ahead of time. You know you're going to do drugs in June. Maybe start in August of the previous year, trying to make sure you have safe, quality drugs instead of, buying random parking lot drugs. Kyle, what were you going to say?
No, I just had a slide here about like testing and whatnot from her. And these are some UK test results, but, it seems like over in Europe, the MDMA contents are very high and variable, but she was saying that the mean average for MDMA is around 168 milligrams.
Which is a little higher than the 120 that like the Ben Sessa study would start with before the booster. So you'd get up to 180 eventually, but in 2 segments.
Right. And then 1 in 5 substances are missold at festivals. So, it's a pretty high number there.
Right. So you bought MDMA, but it was really just Clorox, crystallized Clorox bleach or something. Yeah, not, people aren't really doing that, but they're selling stuff that tastes the right way. And in some cases, some of these drugs will last 3 days and then put you in a psych ward.
Right. And then another one, in the summer of 2018, 1 in 20 MDMA crystal samples were N-ethylpentalone, a very long-lasting cathinone, and had a very similar appearance and smell as MDMA. So
that was really one that keeps you up for 3 days, and in some cases, she was saying, horrifying. Mm-hmm. I was just here to party for tonight. Yeah, so it's dangerous. Like, drugs sold on the street. Not every drug dealer is your friend. Probably most drug dealers aren't your friend, so be careful. There's a lot of stuff being missold. People found a way to make $20 turn into $700, and people are poor enough where they're going to do that. So it's unfortunate, but true. So The Loop, check them out, especially if you're in the UK, the group called The Loop, definitely worth seeing. And then we got into this economics panel, economic models for the expansion of psychedelics. So we had the founder of Synthesis there, CEO of Compass, Bob Jesse, who's, hopefully you all know who Bob Jesse is. He's a kind of legendary behind-the-scenes influencer. Mm-hmm. Bia Labate from Chacruna, Dr. Rucker from King's College London, and then Bennett Zellner, professor and consultant. Do you know where he teaches, Bennett?
He teaches at the business school at the University of Maryland.
Right. Yep. In College Park, Maryland. Yeah. Cool. So very interesting thing. Panel.
What did you take of this panel? It seemed like it was a very heavy, hot debate, and seemed like George Goldsmith from Compass was also taking a lot of heat from the panelists and from the folks in the crowd as well.
It's a weird scene.
I don't know. You also have to applaud him for showing up to an event like that, since Compass has been such a controversial. Yeah.
He knew he was going to get smoked. There's no way he didn't. And did he get smoked? Not really. I was overall disappointed with the panel. Panels seem like a great idea, but they're not always I don't know. We've got to figure out a better way to do panels. That's the long and short. But what happened was everybody was able to give an 8 to 10 minute presentation on what they're up to and their critiques or whatever. And then they sat down and did a moderated kind of Q&A. I think it was, who was moderating? Was
Julie Holland.
Yeah.
Dr. Julie Holland.
She's amazing. And it was interesting, right? Because everybody's got this paranoia about Compass Pathways, and is it warranted? I don't know. I don't have a clear answer. Some people think it's very warranted, and George Goldsmith's number 2 to the devil. I'm like, I don't know. What's happening is he's getting a ton of money to start a company and to have a patent on a particular method of making psilocybin. Not the only method of making psilocybin that's acceptable. It's one method and then one process behind that for treatment-resistant depression. And potentially he'll have the only means of manufacturing psilocybin until somebody else steps up. But it's a company doing what companies do. If we don't like it, that sucks. A lot of the critique was interesting around how are we going to, how is his company going to maximize returns for their investors? Because that's kind of what companies do. And I don't know. I think their strategy is low cost at scale. Low cost at scale potentially means it's going to be a lower quality treatment, but we don't have any data. Like, we don't know that yet. We could probably guess that maybe that would be the case, but I can see scenarios where it would work well. Like, it worked well at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Hospital, like Spring Grove, where Stan was in a hospital situation. And why couldn't it work here? We need time to see how it plays out. And we also need other people to enter the space to compete. Like USONA's, they're kind of competing, but their model for me isn't too clear how they're going to do this. I'd love for somebody from USONA to kind of come on and discuss that with us, but we'll see if I think they've been too busy, and hopefully they'll be ready. And then Synthesis, their situation was interesting. It seems like they're doing okay. I have my doubts about how group psychedelic trips work therapeutically. Group therapy is cool, but when you're all the way vulnerable and dealing with some horrific PTSD, is that really the place for you? And I think they only accept quote unquote healthy normals at this point. So, I don't really know what to say there.
They did, I think, get the green light for establishing like a clinic there to treat people individually through like compassionate care with, I think, truffles. So that was interesting to hear that they'll be moving forward with more of a medical model, it seems like, in the future.
Right. There was some sort of licensing from the government. Yeah. I would love to know more about that. And then Bob Jesse's critique, he right off the gate, unfortunately, kind of lost me because he was critical of Carl Hart's talk, saying, well, these drugs are different. Like, you're not wrong, Bob, but you're missing the point and making the situation a little worse. But then he gets into how he's nervous about Compass monopolizing the scenario. I was not too impressed with his argument, but please watch the video when it's released. I don't know. Did you catch anything like from Bob that was like helpful or kind of useful in the argument against this whole kind of monopoly scenario?
I don't remember. I didn't take too many notes down. I was trying to listen a little bit more, and it's escaped me at this point. But, I think the critique is, it's like something like Compass. Maybe Bob brought this up, and maybe this is where I'm grabbing this from. You have a company like Compass that's taking more of a for-profit route versus how MAP's doing it. So I think he was kind of saying, like, this isn't the only route. We can go a nonprofit route where we're not having to have these large returns on investors and be driven by investors to crank out a bunch of this stuff. We can do it in a different way. Look at all the money that MAPS has raised over these past few years, and this can be a way to go about doing it. So, kind of like this corporate model is a very interesting discussion point, and it does seem like a lot of people in this community or field are very weary about corporations, and I get it. And I think maybe this is like where it comes down to, right? So something like Compass, where they're really trying to scale. For-profits are really great for scalability, for getting things to market, and that's what it sounds like Compass is trying to do. They're trying to really scale this. George made a comment about suicide, and so, he really kind of put his personal story in here in a sense, but just impacted by mental health. And this is why he's so driven to try to get this. But, he made a statistic saying every 40 seconds somebody commits suicide, and every 20 of those, every 20 attempts. And so that just kind of shows where we're at culturally with mental health. Like, a lot of people are suffering, and to some extent we need to be able to get these services and treatments available for people that are really going through things. But at the same time, I feel like big, fast growth when you're dealing with mental health can be kind of tricky. Like, as they said, do you really want to just make all these decisions to make returns on your investors because you need to pump this out? And I don't know if somebody asked this question or if it naturally got brought up, but like people in Compass not really having a lot of experience, the therapy, like the therapist getting trained to do this work, and you're just going to have a lot of like therapists with not much psychedelic background, and they're just going to start trying to really just train people. And is that really beneficial in a sense? And I think maybe it was also their own experience too. Like, would you want a psychedelic therapist without experience? And I think that was part of the critique, was like Compass isn't building in to their training program to have an experience versus like the MAPS model where, you know, you can, if you're getting trained in MDMA psychotherapy, it's built in to have these sessions versus Compass. It's like, we're just trying to crank therapists out to do this work and not building in this model of having therapy. And it's like, yeah, you know, that's a good point in some sense. You know, and I get the other critique too of just compassionately sitting there and helping people through it and being with them. I think that's really helpful. But I also think having some sort of experience of navigating transpersonal states. I mean, my critique on that is like people wanting to get, you know, they get nervous, they see something happen, and then they don't know the extent of the experience. And then the integration phase of trying to navigate these big transpersonal experiences and not maybe having an experience that self. How are you going to help somebody navigate that if like maybe you haven't really, you don't maybe understand the complexities of it at times? You know, like I've definitely been to people sharing my experience and it's just like, yeah, whatever, you know, and I'm like, versus somebody that has had an experience, you know, I share it and it's almost like a little bit more compassion with it, right? It's like, oh yes, I'm right there with you, right? Mm-hmm. I get it.
Yeah, I guess like one of the terms would be congruence. Like you're more congruent with your client, and therefore you get better results. I had a long, interesting conversation with Mike Marchiolis from like psychedelic seminars about this, and I want to dig more into that topic so we have a better foundation to stand on when looking at that, because a lot of it, like you laid out a great case, right? But does that hold up when someone starts going at it? So like, how do we develop an argument that does?
I think about breathwork training, right? Like there's like early on, like there's a lot of things I think I probably would have done if I didn't have those experiences. But over time, I learned not to interrupt somebody's process because I think about all the times that somebody's interrupted my process when I really, on the outside, it looked like I was going through a lot of crazy stuff, right? And somebody's getting worried, their nervous system's getting a little dysregulated because they're like, oh my God, this person needs help. They're going through this really cathartic thing. And having those experiences and being interrupted because somebody else is nervous of like, I've never seen this happen before and I don't know what to do, versus just really trusting the process and being like, I've been there.
That's a great point. Like with breath work, it's a no-brainer for me.
Right.
But I don't know why. For me, it's a no-brainer, but I don't know why it's like a bulletproof argument when I want to like present that argument to somebody else, you know? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying anything's wrong. I'm just saying like, let's get a better argument together where like, hey, Compass, perhaps you're very wrong. And here's our argument. It's usually done in like 2 paragraphs of argumentation when realistically it might need to be 100 pages of like solid argument, you know?
Right. And, you know, I think coming back to like having a medicine session, maybe that's not needed. Maybe somebody just really needs a lot of training in somatic techniques and transpersonal like experiences and philosophy, right?
I'm saying like breathwork should be fine.
Right.
You do like 20 breathwork sessions. It's probably pretty decent. It's better than one MDMA session, probably. 20 breathwork, you really get to know yourself.
Right. There's other ways of getting there, but giving experiences to people so they understand this transpersonal domain.
Totally. Like, unless you're playing with the transpersonal, you're not going to have any real internal framework for how to even categorize this stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we're at about an hour. Is there anything else you wanted to finalize on Horizons? Like, I want to thank Horizons for having us. It was really fun.
Yeah. Shout out to Horizons. Thanks so much.
Can't wait for next year. As soon as I can pre-book, I'm going to pre-book. So, yeah, I'm excited. I think maybe they didn't announce the dates yet, but soon enough, I'm sure.
It's always on that holiday weekend, Indigenous Peoples Day weekend, where some people subscribe to Columbus Day.
Yeah, down with Columbus Day. But that's changing soon enough. I think it was in New York. It was even Indigenous Peoples Day this year, which is great.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. And thanks to everybody who was talking to us and hanging out with us. Really enjoyed everybody I met. I don't think I had a single negative interaction the whole time, which is wonderful. And, going into the city can be a little complicated for me, but it went great. And yeah, so I guess to wrap, if you want to deepen your psychedelic education and perhaps work with us through some crazy experience you had, or to prep for a ayahuasca trip you're doing or some underground work, check out Navigating Psychedelics. Our online course comes with a lot of pre-recorded material, I think over 8 hours, maybe even much more than that. Probably more like 16, honestly, but we haven't counted in a while. But we do a live supported version that kicks off November 6th, and we've got a bunch of seats left for that one. The therapist and clinicians course is sold out, unfortunately. But the live supported one, you get all of the content that we've got pre-recorded and 5 different web meetings with us and the other students, and you can really dig into this psychedelic material. So if you want to deepen your knowledge of psychedelia and your personal relationship with yourself and the psychedelic experiences, this is the course for you. And I like the degree to which I've seen it help people is amazing. And the thanks we get is kind of puts me in awe regularly. Yeah. Especially with these live ones.
Yeah, and I think as I mentioned in the beginning, the container created just to, it's almost kind of like psychoeducation, but it's also kind of like group coaching in a sense too, of like being able to share part of your experience, share your stories, kind of go through the nuances and complexities of all this stuff, and kind of just feel held for a bit, because this is like, really tricky territory to navigate. So we would love to have you, be part of that group. And yeah, it's just so fun being able to just hang out live for an hour and a half for 5 times and just really kind of dig into this material and explore. And if you're feeling like maybe the group thing isn't for you and you want to do some individual work, I am finally launching a coaching program. So yeah, if you are planning a session or you've had an experience where you're trying to continue to work through it and you want some more individual attention versus being in the group, you can check that out at psychedelicstoday.com. Go to the services and coaching part. And so the coaching packages come with Navigating Psychedelics, all the material in there, and then plus the individual calls with me, so we can have a little bit more individual attention on your own experience. So, maybe that's exploring your intention on going in, exploring the set and setting, and then afterwards working through the experience. And with the course, there's tons of cool little activities with the trip journal and the integration workbook. So doing dream work, doing journal prompts, stuff like that, really breaking down your experience and figuring out really how to move it forward in your life. I don't know if you're like me, but I can sit there and process forever. And sometimes I need somebody else to bounce ideas off of or help with accountability. So we're here for you.
Yeah. And as always, please just share any episode you like with your friends. We'd always love more listeners and to spread our word. So Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Likewise. Well,
yeah, I guess that's not the right phrasing, but yeah, glad we got to do this. I think we're going to do a bunch more in the next couple weeks, so stay tuned, everybody. And yeah, if you like it, please just hit us up, psychedelicstoday, email@gmail.com. Love to hear from you, and hope you all are doing well. Joe Moore, Kyle Buller, signing off from Psychedelics Today. See you next time,
everybody.